The first strike came without warning. Orbiting above the planet Jarina 4, a lush colony world on the edge of human space, the Triyx Dominion unleashed its assault. Their fleet consisted of jagged black vessels, like obsidian spears flung into the void. They had waited in the planet's shadow, masking their presence, until they were close enough to strike at the unprepared humans below. Captain Darian Kole stood on the observation deck of the Resolute, the human flagship in the sector. He watched as red tracer fire from the planet's surface flared futilely against the Dominion's shields. The Triyx had underestimated Jarina IV's defenses, but Darian knew the planet wouldn't hold long. Colony worlds were meant to sustain humanity, not defend it. Their orbital cannons were enough for pirates or raiders, but were woefully inadequate against a full-scale Dominion assault. "Captain," Commander Velis called from the command chair. "Sensors confirm the fleet is moving into position to cut off our retreat. They're closing fast." "Of course they are," Darian muttered. He was a lean man in his mid-30s, with sharp features and the kind of steady composure that inspired confidence in his crew. Dominion tactics: strike hard, force a surrender before their target realizes they're outmatched. "Orders, sir?" Velis asked. Darian folded his arms, watching the enemy formation on the tactical display. His own fleet, composed of 3 cruisers, 6 frigates, and a handful of support craft, was outnumbered 3-1. The Dominion had brought their warships, their massive destroyers that dwarfed anything the human fleet could muster. He knew what was expected of him: retreat, save his crew, and cede the colony. That's what most captains would do. "Velis, sound general quarters," Darian said. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Helm, plot a course toward their flagship." The bridge went silent for a moment, the crew exchanging uneasy glances. "Sir," Velis said carefully, "are you suggesting we—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Darian interrupted. "We're going to break through their line and cripple their flagship. If we can take out their command, the rest of the fleet will hesitate." Velis hesitated but nodded. "Aye, Captain." Alarms blared throughout the ship as the crew scrambled to their stations. Darian stepped up to the command chair, gripping the armrests as the Resolute's engines roared to life. The ship surged forward, accompanied by its escort vessels. The Dominion ships reacted immediately, their black hulls shifting into an aggressive formation. Energy beams lanced through space, narrowly missing the human vessels as they weaved and twisted. The Resolute shuddered as its shields absorbed glancing hits, but Darian didn't flinch. "They're focusing fire on the fleet's center," Velis reported, "trying to punch through and isolate us." "Good," Darian said. "Let them think we're desperate." In truth, they were. The fleet wasn't designed for this kind of engagement. Human ships prioritized adaptability and multi-role functionality, but against the Dominion's specialized war machines, they were at a disadvantage. Yet Darian had something the Dominion seemed to lack: a crew willing to fight for more than survival. "Comms," Darian barked. "Broadcast to the fleet. Tell them to hold formation until we reach the flagship. No retreat." "Yes, sir," the comms officer replied, her voice steady despite the tension. The Dominion's flagship came into view, a behemoth of sleek curves and glowing red accents. It was a thing of brutal beauty, bristling with weapons that could annihilate the Resolute in a single volley. But Darian wasn't aiming for a fair fight. "Engineering, divert all power to forward shields and engines," he ordered. "Weapons, prepare for concentrated fire on their bridge. Helm, get us close enough to make them nervous." The crew worked with grim determination, knowing the odds were against them. Darian's plan was audacious, suicidal, some might say. But he understood the psychology of warfare. The Dominion saw humanity as inferior, a species barely worth their attention. They relied on overwhelming force to cow their enemies into submission. Darian intended to show them just how stubborn humans could be. The Resolute surged forward, its escort ships peeling away to engage the Dominion's flanking vessels. Explosions lit up the darkness as ships on both sides were torn apart. The Dominion's destroyers turned their attention to the Resolute, their weapons raining fire on its shields. The ship shuddered violently, sparks flying from consoles as systems strained under the assault. "Shields at 40%, Velis shouted. "We won't last much longer at this rate." "We don't need much longer," Darian said. "Weapons. Fire all batteries on their bridge. Make it count." The Resolute's guns roared to life, unleashing a barrage of plasma and railgun fire. The Dominion flagship's shields flared, struggling to absorb the onslaught. For a moment, it seemed as though the attack might actually succeed, but then the enemy shields held, and the Resolute took another direct hit. "Shields critical," Velis reported. "Hull breaches on decks 3 through 7. Engineering, prepare for emergency containment," Darian said. "Helm, bring us closer. I want us inside their shield perimeter." The bridge crew stared at him in disbelief. No sane captain would attempt such a maneuver. Getting that close to a Dominion flagship was tantamount to suicide. But Darian's expression left no room for argument. The Resolute plunged toward the enemy ship, its engines burning at maximum output. The Dominion's weapons couldn't track fast enough, their targeting systems designed for long-range engagements. As the Resolute slipped through their shields, Darian gave the final order. "All hands, prepare for impact. Helm, ram their bridge." The crew braced as the Resolute collided with the Dominion flagship. The impact sent shockwaves through both vessels, tearing through hulls and igniting secondary explosions. Darian was thrown from his chair, landing hard on the deck. When he looked up, the bridge was a scene of chaos, smoke, fire, and injured crew members struggling to regain control. "Status report," he demanded, pulling himself to his feet. Velis coughed, wiping blood from her forehead. "Their bridge is compromised. Our sensors show significant damage, but, Captain, they're still operational." Darian's jaw tightened. He had hoped the collision would cripple the enemy flagship, but the Dominion's ships were built like fortresses. It would take more than brute force to finish them. "Prepare boarding teams," Darian said. "If we can't take them out from here, we'll do it up close." Velis hesitated. "Sir, you can't be serious. The Dominion has never fought humans like us before," Darian said. "We're not giving up this colony. Not while we're still breathing." He turned to the comms officer. "Patch me through to the fleet." The officer nodded, her hands moving quickly over the console. Moments later, Darian's voice echoed across every ship in the human fleet. "This is Captain Darian Kole. We've engaged the Dominion flagship. They thought we'd run, thought we'd surrender. Let's show them what humans are made of. Fight to your last breath, for Jarina 4. The crew cheered, their resolve renewed. Darian led the first wave of boarding parties, donning his combat armor and gripping his rifle tightly. As the shuttle launched toward the enemy ship, he looked back at the Resolute, battered but still standing, and smiled grimly. The Dominion thought humanity was weak. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The boarding craft slammed into the Dominion flagship's hull with a thunderous impact, sealing against the jagged exterior with magnetic clamps. Inside, Captain Darian Kole steadied himself as the airlock cycled. The boarding team, 20 battle-hardened Marines, gripped their weapons tightly. Their armor bore the scars of previous battles, yet their eyes held the unwavering fire of soldiers who refused to break. "Breaching now," Sergeant Tanis announced, his voice steady despite the chaos outside. The plasma cutters whined as they carved through the enemy bulkhead. A second later, the hatch burst open, and Darian led the charge. The Dominion ship's interior was a maze of sleek metallic corridors, illuminated by the eerie glow of crimson emergency lights. Dominion architecture was cold and calculated, every hallway designed for efficiency rather than comfort. The air smelled sterile, tinged with the faint acrid scent of burning circuits. The first wave of enemy soldiers met them head-on. Triyx warriors, towering figures clad in black exoskeletal armor, moved with brutal efficiency. Their weapons spat, bright lances of energy, forcing Darian's squad to take cover behind the angular support beams lining the corridor. Darian ducked as a plasma bolt sizzled past his head. He raised his rifle and squeezed the trigger, sending a burst of tungsten rounds into the nearest Triyx. The enemy's energy shields flickered under the impact before shattering. The warrior staggered but kept advancing until Tanis stepped forward and finished the job with a single well-placed shot to the head. "Keep moving," Darian ordered, vaulting over the fallen enemy. They pushed deeper into the ship, systematically clearing each room they passed. The Dominion had not expected human forces to board their flagship, and that gave Darian an advantage. They weren't prepared for close-quarters combat. A Dominion officer, clad in ornate armor denoting high rank, emerged from a side corridor. Unlike the frontline soldiers, this one didn't fire immediately. Instead, it observed, its large, lidless eyes narrowing. "You persist beyond reason," the officer intoned in a voice that seemed to reverberate through the ship. "Your kind should have surrendered. You fight without hope." Darian took a step forward, leveling his rifle. "Hope? You think we need hope to fight? We fight because it's who we are. You can take our ships, bomb our cities, but you'll never take away the fact that we don't know how to quit." The officer tilted its head as if struggling to understand. Fascinating, but futile. It raised its hand, and the walls around them shimmered. Automated turrets unfolded from hidden compartments, their barrels glowing as they locked onto Darian's team. "Down!" Darian shouted. The corridor erupted in chaos as gunfire and energy blasts tore through the air. Darian dove behind a bulkhead, feeling the heat of an energy bolt pass dangerously close. The Triyx officer remained where it stood, watching impassively as its forces closed in. "We're pinned!" Tanis growled, blind firing around the corner. "We need another way through!" Darian's mind raced. The Dominion was too disciplined to be drawn into a prolonged firefight, and time was not on his side. His ship was barely holding together outside, and the colony below was still under siege. He needed to act fast. Then he saw it. A maintenance hatch, half hidden behind a fallen Dominion soldier. "There," Darian pointed. "Velis, get that hatch open. We'll flank them." Velis, moving with practiced efficiency, pried open the hatch and slipped inside. The rest of the team followed, their boots clanging against the narrow service tunnel. The confined space forced them into single file, but it also provided cover. Through the grated vents, Darian caught glimpses of the battle raging outside. His Marines were holding their ground, but the enemy was adapting. He activated his comm. "All units, regroup 2 decks above. We take the bridge, or we die trying." The response was immediate. "Understood, Captain." They pressed forward, the tunnel, leading them up through the ship's core. The Dominion's flagship was massive, far larger than anything humanity had ever constructed. But Darian understood one universal truth about ships: control the bridge, and you control everything. As they reached an access point, Darian kicked out the vent cover and climbed through. They emerged into a vast chamber filled with pulsating conduits and control panels. The Dominion's bridge. It was nothing like a human command center. There were no windows, no grand views of space, just a massive central platform surrounded by holographic displays. Dominion officers moved with clockwork precision, relaying commands in their strange, guttural tongue. Darian didn't hesitate. "Take them down!" The room exploded into chaos. The Marines poured fire into the enemy ranks, cutting down officers before they could react. Alarm klaxons blared, and Dominion guards rushed in from adjacent corridors. But Darian's team had the advantage of surprise. The Triyx commander, a tall figure clad in darkened alloy, turned toward them. Unlike the other officers, this one carried no weapon. It simply regarded Darian with something that almost looked like curiosity. "You would die for this colony?" it asked. Darian advanced, his rifle steady. "I would." The commander inclined its head. "Illogical. Your species should know when it is beaten." "Maybe," Darian admitted, "but you should know something about humans." The commander remained silent, waiting. Darian tightened his grip on his rifle. "We don't care about the odds. We don't care how hopeless it looks. As long as we can still stand, we fight." The commander sighed. "Then you leave us no choice." The walls of the bridge shimmered, revealing additional defenses, heavy blast doors sealing the exits, automated turrets lowering from the ceiling. Darian knew what was coming. The Dominion would rather destroy their own bridge than let humans take it. "Captain," Velis warned, "they're locking down the ship." Darian's mind raced. If they lost control of the bridge, their entire mission would collapse. The fleet outside wouldn't last much longer. Then he saw it, a Dominion console, its interface glowing with unfamiliar symbols. A desperate plan formed in his mind. "Velis, can you access their systems?" Velis crouched by the console, her fingers flying over the controls. "I can try, but their encryption is insane." Darian turned back to the Dominion commander. "You wanted to know why we fight? Watch." Velis let out a sharp breath. I think I've got it." The ship trembled. The Dominion officers stiffened in alarm. The central platform flickered as Velis forced her way into their controls. Darian grinned. "Now let's see how well you handle fighting on our terms." Dominion commander's eyes narrowed. "What have you done?" Velis looked up, triumphant. "I've disabled their fleet's coordination network." Outside, the battle shifted. The Dominion fleet, once a perfectly synchronized force, suddenly faltered. Their ships hesitated, their formations breaking apart. Human vessels, battered but still fighting, seized the opportunity and pressed the attack. The Dominion had always relied on precision. Without it, they were vulnerable. The commander took a step back. For the first time, Darian saw something he had never expected on a Dominion officer's face. Doubt. Darian leveled his rifle. "Surrender." The commander exhaled slowly. "You would fight to your last breath, and now, so must we." Then it lunged. Darian barely had time to react before the massive alien was on him, knocking the rifle from his grip. He hit the ground hard, pain lancing through his side. The commander loomed over him, its hands reaching for his throat. Darian gritted his teeth. Surrender was never an option. He would fight until his last breath. Darian barely got his arms up, in time to block the Dominion commander's crushing grip. The alien's strength was monstrous, its black exoskeletal armor pressing down with the force of a hydraulic press. His vision blurred as his body screamed for oxygen, but he refused to give in. His arms trembled as he forced the Dominion's grip away from his throat. He drove his knee upward, slamming it into the alien's midsection. The commander barely reacted. It was like hitting solid metal. With a growl, the Dominion tightened, its grip again, lifting Darian clear off the ground. "You should have surrendered," it rasped. Darian's vision darkened at the edges. He reached for the combat knife strapped to his thigh, fingers fumbling. The commander saw the movement and slammed him against the deck, pinning him down with one massive hand across the bridge. Darian's Marines fought to hold their position. Velis ducked behind a console, firing controlled bursts at the remaining Dominion officers. Tanis engaged in brutal hand-to-hand combat with a Triyx soldier, trading blows that dented armor and shattered bones. They were winning, but barely. Darian's lungs burned. His fingers finally found the hilt of his knife. With the last of his strength, he wrenched it free and drove the blade into the Dominion's neck joint. The alien froze. A shudder ran through its massive frame as the blade sank deep, bypassing its armor plating. Its grip loosened just enough for Darian to twist the knife, severing something vital. The commander staggered back, hands clawing at its throat. Dark purple fluid spilled from the wound. Darian gasped for breath as he scrambled to his feet, grabbed his rifle, turned, and fired 3 rounds into the commander's chest. The alien collapsed, its eyes still locked on him, filled with something that might have been respect or disbelief. He didn't wait to find out. "Tanis! Velis! Report!" Darian barked, wiping blood from his mouth. Velis glanced up from the console she had been using to hijack the ship's systems. "Almost there, Captain. I'm working on overriding their weapons control." Tanis delivered a final blow to his opponent, sending the alien crumpling to the deck. He wiped sweat from his face. "Corridors are clear for now, but we won't hold much longer. More of them are coming." Darian took stock of the situation. His team had suffered casualties, 3 Marines down, 2 wounded, but still fighting. The bridge was theirs for now, but without complete control of the ship, it was only a matter of time before the Dominion counterattacked. "Velis, what's the status of their fleet?" She frowned, fingers flying over the controls. "Their coordination network is still down, but they're adapting. Their ships are falling into smaller formations, operating independently." Darian cursed under his breath. The Dominion learned. Fast. Too fast. He turned to Tanis. "We need a way to disable this ship permanently." Tanis exhaled sharply. "Blowing the reactor should do it." Velis looked up. "That would take out half the Dominion fleet if we detonate it close enough." Darian nodded. "Then that's our new plan." Velis hesitated. "Sir, that means—" "I know," Darian said. "We'll have to get out before it blows." Velis nodded grimly and returned to her work. Tanis checked his rifle. "We won't get a second chance at this." Darian pressed a hand to his earpiece. "All units, fall back to the boarding craft. We're taking this ship straight into the enemy formation." The remaining Marines acknowledged. and they began their retreat. Darian led the charge, moving swiftly through the corridors they had fought so hard to take. Dominion soldiers were regrouping, attempting to retake the bridge, but Darian's team fought with renewed determination. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win. They reached the reactor chamber without further losses. The Dominion ship's core pulsed with raw energy, housed in a cylindrical chamber lined with alien script. Velis wasted no time accessing the controls. "I can overload the containment field," she said. "But once I start, we'll have 5 minutes before it blows." Darian didn't hesitate. "Do it." Velis tapped a series of commands into the console. The reactor's hum grew into a whine, its glow intensifying. Alarms blared throughout the ship. "Time to go!" Darian shouted. They sprinted through the corridors, gunning down any Dominion soldiers who tried to stop them. Explosions rocked the ship as the reactor destabilized. The entire vessel was coming apart. By the time they reached the boarding craft, the hull was fracturing, vents spewing fire and gas. They piled in, sealing the hatch behind them. "Punch it," Darian ordered. The pilot didn't need to be told twice. The boarding craft detached just as the Dominion flagship began to collapse inward. They shot away, narrowly avoiding the shockwave as the reactor finally went critical. The explosion was immense. The Dominion flagship, once an unstoppable behemoth, disintegrated in a blinding burst of energy. The force of the blast tore through nearby enemy ships, ripping them apart. Darian watched from the viewport as the Dominion fleet fell into disarray. Their command structure was shattered, their forces scattered. The human fleet, battered but still standing, pressed the advantage. Cheers erupted across the comms. Darian allowed himself a breath of relief. Velis leaned back, exhausted. "We actually did it," Tanis grinned. "Never doubted it for a second." Darian exhaled, looking out at the battlefield. The Dominion had underestimated humanity. They had expected surrender, compliance. But they had learned the hard way that humans never backed down. Not now. Not ever. The Dominion fleet was in chaos. The destruction of their flagship had thrown their forces into complete disarray, their once perfect formations dissolving into frantic, scattered attempts at regrouping. Human ships, though battered and outnumbered, seized the moment, pressing the attack with a ferocity that caught the enemy off guard. Inside the boarding craft, Darian Kole sat in the co-pilot's seat, watching the battlefield unfold. His body ached from the fight, his knuckles bloodied, his breath still uneven, but he had no time to rest. "Captain," Velis called from the back. "Comms are up. Admiral Ross wants to talk to you." Darian exhaled and tapped his earpiece. A holographic projection of Admiral Ross flickered to life before him, an older man with silver hair and a hardened expression. His uniform bore the insignia of the Terran Defense Command, and his eyes, even over the transmission, carried the weight of countless battles. "Kole," the Admiral said, his voice even. "I just watched a Dominion flagship explode from orbit. Want to tell me how the hell you pulled that off?" Darian smirked, wiping a streak of blood from his cheek. "Took your advice, sir. Got creative." Ross gave a low chuckle. "Damn reckless, but effective. We're mopping up the remnants of their fleet. Now, their forces are retreating. Jarina IV is holding." The weight of those words settled over Darian. They had done it. The colony was still standing. Humanity had survived another onslaught from an enemy that believed them to be weak. Velis leaned against the bulkhead, her arms crossed. "So what? Now? The Dominion isn't just going to forget this happened." Ross nodded. "No, they won't. We made an enemy today, an enemy that now knows humanity won't bow like the others have. But we also made a statement." He looked at Darian. "You proved something out there, Captain. You showed them we don't break." Darian shifted in his seat. He had never been one for grand speeches or politics. But he knew one thing for certain. "They thought we'd surrender," he said quietly. "They thought we'd run the moment things looked hopeless. But humans don't know how to quit." Ross grunted. "No, we don't." He straightened. "Get your team back to the fleet. We'll debrief once we're secure. And Kole, sir?" Ross allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile. "Hell of a job." The transmission cut out. Darian let out a long breath and turned to his crew. They were exhausted, battered, but alive. Tanis had a fresh cut across his forehead but still managed to grin. Velis, for all her usual sarcasm, simply looked relieved. "Let's get back to the fleet," Darian said. "Drinks are on me." Laughter rippled through the craft as they accelerated toward the human formation. Behind them, the Dominion fleet was in full retreat, their once invincible armada humbled. For now, the war was far from over. The Dominion would return. They would come back with more ships, more firepower, and a deeper hatred for humanity. But Darian wasn't afraid, because now the Dominion knew the truth.